These encounters happened a few months ago and left me feeling so shaken. Here are some details just for background information. I briefly worked for a locally owned retail business that has 4 locations in the city I was living in. Most of the employees rotate between the 4 locations, and I was usually scheduled at the same one for most of my week, but would sporadically work at other locations. 2 of the stores are located inside of the buildings that contain shopping centers for other retailers and restaurants. These are the 2 stores that I have been working at during this experience. So it was mid-September, and I had about an hour left on my Saturday shift. A man came in, bought some things, and started conversing with me. I learned that he was a manager at another store within the same shopping center. He didn't seem threatening or creepy in any way, but he was a bit older than me. I'll call him Joe. He visited a couple of times over the next few weeks, and then one evening, after talking for a few minutes, he asked if I wanted to smoke a blunt with him after my shift. I told him I had plans to attend a party that night, but I didn't see anything wrong with smoking a blunt with him, so I did. After I closed the store, we met up, walked away from the building, and smoked a blunt. He asked if I wanted to grab a quick drink, and I'd agreed, but said just one because I did have other plans. We got a drink, and then he used my phone to send a text message to himself so he could have my number. He seemed harmless enough, so I was okay with it. I thanked him for the drink and departed, not thinking too much of it. I had been careful about how much personal information I gave him. No full name, no description of where I lived, just that I lived in the south side of the city. For the next couple of Saturdays, he would stop in, buy something small, say hello when I was there. I didn't find this odd at all because he worked in the same building and I work at the same shop every Saturday. He would get a little too comfortable sitting by the counter, which made me a little uneasy sometimes, but he was never intimidating. If anything, he was just a bit annoying because he tried so hard to seem cool, telling me all about his partying lifestyle. I also found it odd when I found that he had friend requested me on Facebook. Maybe he looked it up with my phone number, but it still made me feel like he had invaded my privacy. Now fast forward a couple of weeks later. It was Saturday and I was working at a different location than usual. This store was also located in a small shopping center, but not the one I usually worked at on Saturdays. I was finishing up checking out a customer when someone else walked in the store and out of view behind a shelf. The first customer walked out, and guess who came walking over to the counter? It was Joe. I said, "Wow, what are you doing here?" Not in an unfriendly tone, but like, what was he doing here? This led to the first encounter that made me genuinely uncomfortable. He ignored my question and immediately parked himself nearly behind the counter as if he worked there. This made me very uncomfortable because he was basically blocking me in behind the counter. To get out from behind the counter, I'd have to squeeze between him and a display case. He seemed to be playing dumb and said stuff like, "Wow, I didn't even know you guys had a store in here." Which I know was bullshit because he didn't work anywhere near this building, and I knew he wasn't just wandering around the city like, I wonder what stores are in here. He asked about how my week was, and I told him with as little detail as possible that I had been having a fun week going out with friends. He asked if I wanted to smoke again after the shift, and I said no thank you. I had things to do. Then he was asking what other kind of drugs I was into and started to tell me all about his wild night with his crazy friends. I was extremely uninterested, but he didn't pick up on it and just kept going. I started to get more uncomfortable and thought about asking him to leave, but I didn't want to be rude since he hadn't really done anything threatening. I think that he had planned all this out strategically. He had spent so much time trying to gain my trust in a way. He never acted predatory or out of line so that I would become more comfortable around him and allow him to get away with more creepy behaviors without saying anything. This is where it started to get weird. Again, he asked if I wanted to get high, and I reiterated that I didn't want to smoke because I had stuff to do later. He started asking if I liked uppers, if I'd ever tried speed. I haven't. And then admitted that he hadn't slept and was still high on speed from the night before. This put me so on edge, I didn't really know how to react. My anxiety was spiking. I was starting to feel very panicky. He hinted again at the idea of us getting high together, and I was like, okay, what are you talking about? I told you I don't want to smoke. And he clarified that he wanted me to do speed with him, but if I did want to do it, I'd, quote, have to hang out with him for at least half an hour. At this point, I was so extremely uncomfortable I didn't know what to say. I was freezing up, hoping he would just go away. Oh, and for the record, I did not know up until after this encounter that speed was slang for meth. Otherwise, I would have told him to get the fuck out at that point. I told him I had never done speed and I didn't intend to. He reluctantly accepted, but didn't leave. He asked if there was an office in the back of the store, if there were cameras. There was. I pointed them out to him, and if we could go and do speed in the office. Again, I declined his offer and wished that he would leave. Finally, he decided to go and said that he would see me later. After he left, I was basically panicking because I kept realizing how fucking weird the whole thing was. How did he know where I was working that day? Maybe he went to my usual location and asked why I wasn't working there that Saturday. I asked a friend to meet me after my shift so I wouldn't have to leave alone and encounter him again. Oh, thank God he didn't come back. But it made me so nervous I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder as I closed the store. I didn't want to tell my manager about it because I couldn't really tell her that I went and smoked weed with him after my shift. I felt so sick about the whole thing, but it didn't end there. Fast forward to the end of October. Joe had not made any more appearances. One Friday, I had a closing shift that was only a couple of hours in the late afternoon. I had rolled on Molly for the first time the night before, and I was feeling fairly fragile, for lack of a better term. Literally moments after I had settled in, guess who came waltzing in? My heart dropped. I was in no place to deal with him right now, and I had no idea what to do. I was so exhausted and out of it that I just didn't do anything. He stayed there for my entire shift, talking my ear off the whole time as I said nothing. And he even interacted with customers as if he worked there too. I wanted to cry the whole time. I felt powerless. I let him get this far and had no way to stop him from acting this way. And part of me was legitimately afraid to simply ask him to leave. I think he knew this. I was counting the minutes till the end of my shift. When it finally arrived, I was ready to run out of there. He followed me out of the building. He followed me to my bus stop. The entire time talking and talking and talking, bragging about his musician friends and his artist friends and how much crazy fun they would have at the raves. I would literally go 10 minutes without saying a word and he just wouldn't stop talking. I stood waiting for my bus, people all around us at the bus stop, and I just wanted to cry. He asked which bus I was taking, and I felt I had no choice but to tell him because he'd seen me getting on the bus anyway. He then casually mentioned that the bus I take goes past his friend's house. I prayed he wouldn't use that as an excuse to get on the bus with me, and frantically tried to think of a plan to stop that from happening. I texted my friend asking him to call me to pretend we were making plans. I spoke with him for a minute on the phone and then hung up and told Joe that I was going to hang out with a bunch of my guy friends from high school, hoping that would deter him from following me further. It was another unbearable few minutes before my bus came, and I wanted to cry with relief when he didn't attempt to follow me on the bus. I ended up quitting the job for unrelated reasons, so I figured I would never see or hear from him again. He texted me a few weeks later and I simply said, "Can you please stop talking to me?" He respectively agreed and I blocked his number as well as his Facebook. I was surprised how easy it had been, but a few weeks later, I was at a museum with some friends that were visiting from out of town. We had a really great day and had just entered the gift shop when my friends decided to go use the restroom. I waited around at the gift shop, idly playing with some souvenir rocks, when I looked up and saw something that made me do a double take. My blood ran cold when my fears were confirmed. It was Joe, here in the gift shop 5 feet away from me. He was with a child. His back was to me, so I ducked out of the gift shop and ran to the bathroom to tell my friends. I felt myself starting to get panicky. Just seeing him was beginning to become triggering for me. I couldn't believe he was here. We do not live in a very small city. The museum is an entirely different part of the city than where I had seen him before. I was terrified. I saw him walk out of the gift shop and continue walking into the opposite direction of us. I was sure he hadn't seen me. My friends and I went back into the gift shop to look around some more before leaving. The gift shop was a little bit crowded. I was looking at a display when I felt a hand on my shoulder, and I thought it was one of my friends. I turned around to see that it was Joe. He was saying, "Excuse me," and I don't know if he meant it as in, "Can I have your attention," or "Can I get by you?" But I felt as if I was going to throw up. We made eye contact, and he smiled, and I bolted through a crowd of people. I walked far away from the gift shop and waited for my friends to come back out, and we left quickly. I never saw Joe again after that. I hate thinking about it now because it gave me some serious anxiety to think what could have happened if I didn't have a bad feeling. If I had ever met up with him again, and if I decided to do more drugs with him, who knows what could have happened. It honestly chills me to this day just thinking about the fact that he may have been stalking me. If not, there were some insane coincidences that took place. So this is my story. I never heard from Joe again, and soon I moved out of that city. Joe, I hope we never, ever meet again. I work in an outdoor mall in a great neighborhood. You assume that it's safe as hell to be there, but then again, you just can't be sure anymore. There are creepy people everywhere, and I just can't help shake the feeling that this isn't my last encounter with this man. I'm 19 years old and work at a kiosk that sells all kinds of wonky jewelry. It's usually teens, young adults, and occasionally some older adults that shop with us. Every once in a while, this man comes up to the kiosk, easily recognizable. Same leather jacket, crinkled corner of his eyes, one front tooth shorter than the other, same slouched way of walking. He's usually harmless, but oh my god, the last few times he's come by has made me so uncomfortable. I greet every customer with, "Hey, can I help you find anything?" And most of them just say they're looking. He always smiles at me and says, "Just looking, darling." At first it was fine. I didn't care whatsoever. He seemed like a harmless 50 or so year old man. He always spent a very long time looking at the display and never bought anything. Most of the time I'm working the night shift. At the kiosk, while I'm surrounded by other shoppers and other kiosk workers, mine is kind of all by itself in between two empty ones in the back. And I'm usually left alone, minus the friendly security woman that stops and chats with me on her rounds. She comes by every 30 minutes or so, and she's one of the few friends that I have at work. The only stores in my view are a Reebok and a Macy's. A few nights ago I was sitting in my kiosk bored out of my mind, and the security lady had already continued on her way. I had scrolled through Reddit already and was getting ready to open up Netflix and continue watching my show, when I hear footsteps coming up. I look up to see the creepy man staring at me, but not actually at the kiosk yet. I wave at him and he gives a little smile, but one that sends chills down my spine. A customer walks up and I immediately jump at the chance to help him, trying to shake the creepy feeling I had. After I had checked out the customer and had written down the receipt, I glanced up to see the man still staring at me. Before I could say anything, he started walking over, taking my eye contact as permission to come join me. "Good evening, darling," he said, doing an almost bow. "Good evening," I told him. He proceeded to do his usual, checking the display but not buying anything. Instead of walking around the cart, he stayed by the register where I was. Walked behind my chair to check the sides but never went where he couldn't see me. Then he started asking questions like we were longtime friends. "So, darling, do you have a boyfriend?" I kind of guffed at that because I've been single for over a year now. I told him no, I didn't have a boyfriend, but there was a checkout girl I found pretty damn cute at my local grocery store. "I see," he said. "Do you have any plans after work?" he asked me. I was getting uneasy at this point, but I told him yes, I was going to a party. "You gonna hook up with any boys?" he asked. My jaw dropped. Whether or not I was hooking up with any boys was in no way any of his business, but I just told him no. He then smiled a little and said, "Good, you're too pretty for them little boys anyway." He faced me again and came up to hug me. Until this point I hadn't realized that my heart rate was increasing, and it only became apparent after I found it harder to breathe. Before he actually said what he said, Linda, the security woman, walked up and glared at him. "Sir, if you're not going to be buying anything from this young woman, I suggest you go and order somewhere else." He stiffened at the sound of Linda's voice and he laughed. "You okay, honey?" she asked me. I shrugged. "He's always here," I told her. She shook her head. "Let me and Russ walk you to your car after work today." I nodded, relieved that she offered without me having to ask. The rest of my shift is fine. I get through it and manage to make my bosses a bit of money. At 10 o'clock on the dot, Linda and her boyfriend Russ are at my kiosk. They wait for me to pack up my purse and then walk me to my little Prius. They wait for me to drive away as well. I'm on my way to the party. I stop by a gas station to fill up the tank. As I'm waiting for it to fill, I glance over and see the man from the mall with the mini mart. He's buying a pack of cigarettes and he looks out the window and sees me. When he does, he smiles and waves, holds up one finger asking me to wait a minute. I don't. I yank out the fuel hose and jump in my car, booking it out of there. I take several detours before arriving 30 minutes late to the party. I had to make sure I would lose him before showing up there. It's been a few nights since that happened, and the only reason I'm writing this now is because I'm actually working the morning shift, and I just saw him walk out of the store across from me. Linda has someone biking around this half of the mall, so he won't come near me today, but I'm still a little creeped out. I used to work retail. I know many of you shuddered at that sentence right there. Anyway, the store where I worked sold children's clothing. It was an okay job, but still had some interesting folks come in every once in a while. I was in my late teens to early 20s while I worked there. It was a busy Saturday and I was doing my best to keep the store tidy while helping customers. I was straightening a rack when this guy confronted me. He was tall, had a dark complexion and hair, and was wearing glasses. He looked about 30, give or take. He wasn't with anybody else and didn't appear to be shopping for a child. He struck up a conversation and was smiling and friendly the whole time. I don't recall what he was talking about exactly, but he kept following me around and not getting the hint that I was busy and uninterested. He then asked me if I had a boyfriend and I told him yes, but I can't remember if it was true at the time. He continued to hang around and told me I was pretty. He was making me uncomfortable and I wish he would leave me alone, but he wasn't really being rude and I was too polite to just tell him to go away. Then he told me he was from Egypt and that he wanted me to go there with him. He told me we'd have a great time and I'd love it there. I'd love it so much, in fact, that I'd want to live there. Alarms were going off in my mind. Like, who are you and why would I just take off halfway across the globe with you? I declined too politely and he left the store. I felt so relieved. Honestly, I was somewhat flattered but weirded out. I went about my shift and maybe an hour or two later, he returned. I was behind the counter ringing up customers and I'm very grateful that I was. He stood behind the people I was ringing up, interrupting whatever small talk we were making during the transaction and proceeded to beg me to come with him to Egypt. He had lost his smile and charm. Instead, he appeared desperate and impatient. I again told him no and was not nice about it this time. He left the store in a huff. I never saw him again, but I wish I had reported him to mall security or maybe even the police. I was naive at the time, but looking back, he was either a desperate weirdo or a human trafficker. Scary stuff, and I hope he didn't succeed with anyone else.